Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into my talk. Today we're going to talk about building Vagrant plugins with Go. It's going to be a pretty quick one, so let's get into it. I'm Sophia. I'm a software engineer on the Vagrant team. So last year we were here and we talked a little bit about Vagrant and Go and Ruby and how we were planning on transitioning from Vagrant being a Ruby project to Go and how we're going to make that happen. Today we're going to actually be building a Vagrant Go plugin. So let's take a little bit of a refresher on how that whole architecture looks. Basically what we have like a Vagrant core written in Go, and then we use Go plugin in order to interact with all of our plugins. So we have like Vagrant Go plugins that implement our like SDK. And then on the Ruby side, we have like this Vagrant shim, which acts as like a translation layer between like being able to interact with the gRPC API, which Go plugin needs, and the actual like Ruby API. We can take a look at the RPC definitions for our like services. They all kind of have the similar form. They have like the functionality that you actually want. So for our guest service, we need to be able to detect a guest plugin, and then they have their corresponding spec, and that's allows a little bit of flexibility on the plugin implementation side. So we're gonna see the result of that when we build our plugin. And then on the SDK side, we have this component interface. They all have similar forms as well. It's like the functionality that you want, and then func as the name, and then they all take no arguments and return an interface, and it's going to be, the interface is going to be the function that you actually want to run that like does the heavy lifting of that functionality. So let's go ahead and build something. So today I've chosen to build a Parrot OS guest plugin. This is a Debian-based OS. And now that you know as much about Parrot OS as I do, we can all build this together. So the first thing we're going to do is clone our repo. So we have like a little skeleton repo. We're going to then implement our like detect and parent functions. So implement our guest interface. And we're going to build a plugin. We're going to install it into a Vagrant project, and we're going to run it. So here we go. I've already copied down the repo. Here it is. So that's step one for free. On to step two. We're going to do a Go mod init to like start up our project. So Go mod init, and then SOP1, and then Vagrant guest Parrot OS. That is a descriptive name for this plugin. We're going to ignore what the terminal says because it lies. And step three is actually to go update some stuff around. We have like a placeholder, my special guest. We can do better on naming here. We'll call this guest Parrot OS. And all that, and then we'll update the comment. And then moving on to main, this my special guest doesn't exist anymore. It's actually Parrot OS. And the name of this plugin we'll call Parrot OS as well. And then we got to update this import here. It's Parrot OS. Cool. So that all looks good. Next step is to do a mod tidy. And then we can build it to make sure it all works, or it all builds. Cool. So we're in a good state. That means we can go ahead and fill in the implementation. So let's go ahead and do that. So here is our guest plugin. We see it has the guest detect func. So that's the bit that we need to implement to satisfy our component interface. I'm just going to return a function and detect. So in order to detect if we're running some guest, that means we need to run a command on the guest machine to see if we're running what we think we're running. So the first thing we're going to do is pull out a machine from this target. So target is like a more generic version of the machine that you know and love if you've been inside of Vagrant's internals. The target is something we introduced in this version of Vagrant, but we're going to use the machine here. We can output a little bit error if we have trouble getting the machine. We shouldn't. It should be good. Okay, so let's make sure we have the machine that we all know and love. Cool. And then with this machine, we can pull out a communicator because that's the thing that we need to run a command on the guest. So that's just running the communicate function, machine.communicate. We can do a little bit of error checking here. Cool. Oh no. Okay, so now we need to decide what command we want to run. This is like the money of like the guest plugins. So let's define a command, and we'll say cat etc os releases, and we want to look for ID equals parrot. Cool. So now we're going to use the communicator to run the test function, and that's going to connect to the guest machine. So we give it the machine, and it's going to run our command on it. And then it's going to output a Boolean or an error. The Boolean will be like if it succeeded or if it failed. So one nice thing to do at this point for our own sanity for this demo is to get a terminal, like a terminal UI, so we can like output a message to the user. So here it is, we can run a UI.output, and we can say we found it or we didn't find it. Cool. And we can return if it's found or if it's not found. And yeah, that detect function looks okay to me. So moving on, we have parent func, and that also is part of the API that we need to, or part of the interface that we need to implement. So I mentioned earlier that Parrot OS is based on Debian, and I know for a fact there is a built-in Ruby plugin for Debian, and it's called Debian. So we'll name that here, and we'll be able to use all of the capabilities that are defined by that plugin. So we could go ahead and define a few more capabilities for Parrot OS, but we really don't need to in order for a Vagrant up to work. So we're going to skip that for now. Also note that this Debian plugin is in Ruby, so you're able to use Ruby plugins from within Go plugins and vice versa. So let's go ahead and build this thing, and that looks good. So we're going to install it into our project. So I already have this Vagrant project set up. It's Parrot OS. It's using the box that I called Parrot OS, and I've already imported, I built it locally and imported it into Vagrant using the Vagrant box command you might be familiar with. So now we need to install the plugin. So plugin installs for Vagrant plugins, or for Vagrant Go plugins, goes into Vagrant plugins. So we make that directory, and then we can just plop our binary into that folder. So now Vagrant should know that that plugin exists. We can run a Vagrant up. So at this point, Vagrant is like starting up like Ruby and loading up all the plugins. So it'll be looking in our .vagrant/plugins directory, which is where we plopped in our plugin, and then it'll also be looking in like the basis directory for any plugins that are there. So that's where you can install like Vagrant wide plugins. So right now this plugin is only usable by like this Vagrant project. So we're going ahead and importing that base box. You notice that we're bringing this machine up with the VirtualBox provider. So that's actually a Ruby plugin. And then we can take a look at the processes that are running. So we have our Vagrant up, which is a command we ran. And then you can see that we have this Ruby process running. So the Ruby process is running like this Vagrant serve. Vagrant serve is a command we added that starts up Vagrant as a gRPC server. So that's like a long running process that is going to serve as like the shim. So we can use like Ruby plugins in Go and vice versa. So you can see here that vbox manage is being run by that process. And that tracks because we saw in our Vagrant UI that we were running with a VirtualBox provider. And then we see these other couple of plugins, other plugin, my plugin, HTTP downloader, and those are a couple of built-in plugins that I have set up in my environment. And then we have our Vagrant guest Parrot OS, and that's the plugin that we built and installed. So here, Vagrant is booting our guest, or VirtualBox is booting our guest, and Vagrant is waiting for SSH to become available. So classic Vagrant experience that you're familiar with. Good time to stretch your legs while the machine is booting. And so once the machine is booted and SSH connection is established, then that'll be when the guest detection is happening. So we can expect our Parrot OS plugin to be running at some point, and there it is. That's our little message that we output. Detecting Parrot equals true. So that means our plugin ran. It means that our communicate function worked. So that's using a Ruby plugin from inside our Go plugin. And then we see that we're mounting our shared folders now. And so that's going to be running capabilities from the Debian guest plugin, which we said that our Parrot OS plugin that we just defined is like the child of. So that was a successful Vagrant up. So that was a successful build of a plugin. So if you would like to contribute to the Parrot OS guest plugin, it's up under my GitHub user at Sophia1/Vagrant-guest Parrot OS. You can build it yourself if you want and run Vagrant with it. Or you can go ahead and build your own Vagrant guest plugin. We have a template repository set up. It's at Sophia1/Vagrant guest plugin skeleton. That's just a template repo. So GitHub Magic will make that easy for you to get going. Thanks for tuning in. And I hope you have wonderful rest of your talks. Thanks. Bye.